The waiting area at Chicago O'Hare International Airport buzzed with restless travelers on a dreary, rain-swept November morning. Overhead announcements sliced through the low hum of conversations, reminding passengers to check their gates, watch their belongings, and stay updated on schedule changes. Beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, a diverse crowd milled about families with strollers, business professionals in sleek suits, and students with backpacks all converging at Gate 17. The 9 a.m. flight to Atlanta had been delayed, much to the frustration of the waiting passengers. At the heart of the first-class section stood Julia Prescott, a polished corporate executive in her mid-30s. Dressed in a tailored gray blazer and matching pencil skirt, her blonde hair secured in an elegant silver barrette, she exuded an air of control. The rhythmic tapping of her black pumps against the floor betrayed her impatience. She was bound for an important management conference, where she planned to dazzle the right people and secure a long-awaited promotion. As she scrolled through a stream of urgent emails, she willed herself to focus, pushing aside the growing irritation of the delay. Finally, the overhead speaker crackled to life, announcing the boarding call for first-class passengers. Exhaling in relief, Julia clutched her designer handbag and a sleek tote bursting with work documents, striding purposefully toward the jet bridge. Inside the plane, first class offered its usual sanctuary of wide seats and complimentary champagne. Settling into seat 2A, she placed her bags in the overhead compartment and resumed scanning her phone. Moments later, a tall black man in an army uniform appeared at the front of the cabin, his eyes scanning for his seat assignment. The name patch on his chest read D. Parker. With a polite nod, he motioned toward seat 2B beside Julia. Her green eyes flickered with barely concealed annoyance as she offered a tight smile, though an unspoken judgment formed in her mind. I wonder if he's here on some military courtesy upgrade. I paid full price for my seat. Resisting a sigh, she turned toward the window, making it clear she had no intention of engaging in conversation. Daniel Parker took his seat and nodded politely. A flight attendant soon approached, offering pre-departure drinks. Noticing his uniform, she smiled warmly. Thank you for your service, Sergeant. Let me know if you need anything. Julia's jaw tightened. Of course, she thought bitterly. Another special perk for the military. Everyone fawning over them. She pressed her lips together and reached for her phone, pretending to be absorbed in work. Despite her self-perception as someone who didn't see color, Julia harbored a deep-seated prejudice, one that simmered whenever she felt her own privilege was challenged. She prided herself on hard work, on earning her place in the world, and resented anyone she perceived as getting ahead without the same struggles. As the flight progressed, Julia caught a glimpse of Daniel pulling out a small, well-worn photograph. A little girl, perhaps 8 or 9, beamed at the camera, a sparkly headband in her hair and a soccer ball clutched in her hands. Julia's curiosity got the better of her. "Cute kid," she remarked, her tone cool. "Your daughter?" Daniel looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. That's my daughter, Kayla." Julia almost rolled her eyes at the ma'am. "She must be proud her dad's in uniform," she added, an edge of sarcasm creeping in. "You traveling home from duty?" "I'm heading to Atlanta to see her," Daniel replied simply. Something about his lack of elaboration irritated Julia. She found herself prodding. "Must be nice to have the airline upgrade you," she said pointedly. "First class and all." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I paid for this seat myself. I'm not looking for handouts." His tone remained calm, but firm. Julia inhaled sharply, feeling a rush of indignation. She turned away, inserting an earbud and effectively ending the conversation. Yet an undercurrent of resentment lingered. Mid-flight, the attendants served lunch. When Daniel declined alcohol, the flight attendant again expressed gratitude for his service, reminding him his meal was complimentary. Julia could no longer hold her tongue. "Don't you ever get tired of people fawning over you just because you wear a uniform?" she asked, her voice laced with disdain. Daniel set his fork down, his expression unreadable. "I appreciate kindness," he said evenly, "but I don't ask for special treatment." Julia scoffed. "Really? Because it sure seems like everyone bends over backward for you." Daniel's lips pressed into a firm line. "Ma'am, if it bothers you that much, I can pay for my meal. It's not a big deal. Julia shrugged. It's not about the meal. It's about principle. Silence fell between them, but something gnawed at her. When Daniel quietly mentioned he was visiting his daughter because of a medical emergency, a flicker of empathy threatened to rise within Julia. But she buried it. Probably another sob story about medical bills. When they landed in Atlanta, Julia eagerly disembarked, ignoring Daniel's presence. She had a conference to focus on. At baggage claim, she glimpsed him on the phone. Yes, Miss Carter, I'm here. I'll be at the hospital soon. His tense posture nagged at something deep inside her, but she brushed it aside. Not my problem. The next morning, Julia's conference began in full swing. She delivered a sharp, polished presentation, earning nods of approval. Stepping out for a break, she glanced at her phone and froze. A news headline read, "Local Army Sergeant's Child Fighting for Her Life, Community Rallies in Support." Clicking the article, she felt her stomach lurch. It was Daniel Parker. His daughter, Kayla, was in critical condition, battling a congenital heart defect. A photo showed the little girl, now frail and hooked up to IVs. The article mentioned Daniel's struggle to cover the costs of an advanced, life-saving procedure. Shame gripped Julia. She thought back to her cruel remarks on the plane, the skepticism in her voice. Overcome with guilt, she clicked on the attached fundraiser link. The goal was $150,000. The total stood at just $37,000. Her fingers hovered over the donation box. For once in her life, money felt insignificant compared to the weight of her own conscience. She typed in $10,000 and pressed submit, her heart pounding. The next morning, she drove to Peachtree Children's Hospital, nerves twisting in her stomach. When she reached Kayla's room, she hesitated, then knocked gently. Daniel turned, surprise flashing across his face. "Miss Prescott?" "I read about Kayla," she admitted, voice trembling. "I wanted to check on you both." Daniel studied her. Finally, he nodded. "She's fighting." Julia swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for how I acted, for what I said." She met Kayla's tired eyes. "Hi, Kayla. I met your dad on a plane." Kayla gave a small smile. "You travel a lot too?" Tears pricked Julia's eyes. "Yeah," she whispered, "but I think I was meant to be here." Daniel also needed logistical help, navigating insurance, handling the complexities of hospital paperwork, and organizing potential second opinions. Julia volunteered without hesitation. Daniel, however, was initially reluctant. "You don't owe us your time," he said, fiddling with the wedding ring he wore on a chain around his neck. "But if you really want to help, I won't say no." Julia threw herself into the task, channeling the same meticulous organization she once used for corporate projects. Through relentless research and phone calls, she discovered that Kayla's best chance lay with a highly specialized surgeon experienced in rare congenital defects. The problem? The wait list was painfully long. One sunny afternoon, Julia stepped out of the hospital's main entrance, phone pressed to her ear as she called a contact who oversaw special medical approvals. Once, she might have used such connections purely for personal gain. Now, she felt an overwhelming need to help, not out of penance, but because she genuinely cared. As she worked, a colleague from the conference she had abandoned texted her, "Missed your afternoon session. Everything okay?" Julia responded simply, "Helping someone who needs me." It was the first time in years she had willingly turned her back on the relentless pursuit of career advancement. And yet, it felt right. That evening, as she prepared to leave the hospital, she ran into Daniel in the corridor. He looked exhausted, but managed a weary smile. "Kayla had a rough afternoon, but she's stable again." His eyes studied her. "I see you running around, making calls, ignoring your corporate obligations for us. Why are you doing this, Julia?" She took a steadying breath, her heart pounding. "Because I've realized you're worth it," she said softly. "And Kayla is worth it too. Not because you're a soldier, not because I feel guilty, but because you're human beings who deserve help." Days stretched into a week. The specialized surgeon finally agreed to move Kayla's case up the priority list, partly due to growing public interest, partly due to the hospital's philanthropic arm stepping in. Julia even attended a hospital board meeting, using her corporate acumen to advocate for Kayla's immediate needs. She no longer cared if people whispered that she was pulling strings. For once, ambition wasn't about self-promotion. It was about saving a life. On the day of the surgery, anxiety thickened the air. In the corridor outside the pediatric surgical ward, Julia stood beside Daniel as nurses prepped Kayla. At the double doors leading to the operating room, the little girl clutched a small teddy bear Julia had given her. She offered a brave smile, though tears glistened in her eyes. Julia nearly broke down when she heard Kayla whisper, "I'll be okay, Daddy. Miss Julia says I'm strong." Hours passed in excruciating silence. Daniel paced, hands clasping and unclasping, while Julia sat rigidly in a chair, staring at the clock. Though she had never been religious, she found herself silently praying to any power that might help Kayla pull through. Finally, the surgeon appeared, looking exhausted but relieved. "The procedure went well," he announced. "We've repaired the defect. She'll need close monitoring, but her prognosis is cautiously optimistic." A collective sigh of relief swept the room. Daniel buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Julia felt tears spill down her cheeks, an overwhelming mix of relief and awe. She touched Daniel's arm gently. He looked up at her, teary-eyed, and pulled her into a brief, grateful hug. In the days that followed, Kayla's recovery was a roller coaster. Pain management, follow-up scans, and physical therapy. Julia visited often, sometimes bringing fresh pajamas or healthy snacks. She would sit beside Kayla's bed, reading bedtime stories while Daniel took breaks for coffee or medical updates. "Miss Julia, you're the coolest grown-up friend ever," Kayla declared one afternoon. That simple label warmed Julia's heart more than any corporate accolade ever had. Meanwhile, Kayla's story gained national attention. News outlets highlighted her journey, sparking discussions on medical insurance gaps for military families. Julia even appeared in a short video interview alongside Daniel, describing the outpouring of donations and the struggle to secure top-tier care. Some speculated about a possible romance between them, but the truth was simpler and far more profound. They had built a bond that transcended their painful first encounter. Julia's transformation didn't stop at the hospital doors. She sought counseling to confront the prejudices she had harbored for years. Raised in a mostly white, affluent neighborhood, she had absorbed subtle yet persistent racist sentiments from relatives. Only now did she realize how deeply those biases had shaped her worldview, including her initial reaction to Daniel Parker on that plane. It was uncomfortable, but she leaned into the process, determined never to inflict such harm again. Kayla's health steadily improved. A milestone arrived when her pediatric cardiologist declared her ready for partial discharge. On the day she left the hospital, she wore brand new sneakers that lit up with each step. She wrapped her small arms around Julia. "Thank you for helping me, Miss Julia. I hope you still come see me even though I'm not in the hospital." Julia's throat tightened. "I promise I will," she whispered, blinking back tears. As Daniel helped Kayla into a wheelchair for the final hospital paperwork, he turned to Julia. "I can't repay you for everything you've done. I know it started with a donation, but you went far beyond that. You stood by us. I'll never forget it." Julia smiled. "Just let me be in Kayla's life. That's enough." The next month felt like stepping out of darkness. Kayla adjusted to her medication, easing back into childhood, reading, drawing, even short walks in the park, with Daniel pushing her stroller. Julia remained involved, organizing meal trains, dropping off groceries, or simply showing up to chat. Work felt different now, less fulfilling compared to the real impact she was making. Instead of chasing promotions, she began pushing for philanthropic initiatives within her company. Management took notice, offering her a leadership role in corporate social responsibility, a position she never would have pursued before meeting Daniel and Kayla. 3 months later, Julia found herself at a backyard barbecue at Daniel's aunt's house. The only white person in attendance, she expected to feel out of place. Instead, she felt nothing but warmth and welcome. Seated at a picnic table, she watched Daniel help Kayla toss a foam football. The ball wobbled. Kayla laughed so hard, she had to hold her chest carefully. Daniel guided her arms, and this time, the ball sailed a few feet further, Their shared laughter filled the yard. Julia closed her eyes, inhaling the scent of charcoal smoke and freshly cut grass. She thought back to how it all started. Her hateful words on the plane, the assumptions she had made. If I hadn't taken that flight, if I hadn't read that article, the thought was too enormous to process. Fate, luck, destiny, whatever it was had forced her to confront the ugliest parts of herself. And somehow, it had given her the chance to change. Later, as the sun dipped below the trees, Kayla snuggled beside her. "Can we read a story?" she asked. Julia pulled a book from her purse and began to read by the glow of the porch light. Daniel stood nearby, arms folded, glancing over at them. Their eyes met. He mouthed a silent thank you. In that moment, Julia felt the last pieces of her old self slip away. She had found something far more meaningful than career success. She had found redemption, family, and a reason to keep fighting for others. Because sometimes, the worst moments in our lives don't define us. The choices we make afterward do.